Teachers of Reddit, did a student ever offer you sex to pass a class? If yes, how did you react and what were the further consequences? Yes. I was a teacher in rural West Africa for a few years. I had a few students approach me and make an offer. I rejected them 100%, and had long conversations regarding how inappropriate and terrible this was. It didn't help that it was quite common for this to happen, and the same females that were approaching me were approaching the other teachers. At one of my schools, 2 girls became pregnant from teachers, which gets kinda ugly since pregnant girls are not allowed to be in school. We had faculty meetings where the principal would say verbatim, "Okay, I need to tell all the teachers not to sleep with students," and the teachers would laugh and say, "But who are we supposed to sleep with?" And everyone would chuckle and then discuss the next topic on the agenda. It's pretty common, at least once or twice per semester. As many other posters have implied by their stories, I think it is generally not really a quid pro quo for grades, but rather it is the only way they can think of to act on their crush. Often those who are making the offer are already earning A's, and also, as many other posters have suggested, the crush isn't physical. I'm in my mid-40s, but look much older, but more of an intellectual infatuation. In those cases in which the student clearly is trying to swap a good grade for sex, I always find that vaguely insulting. Really? You think you're the best I could get? Gross. In some of those cases, I suspect they are just hoping to flirt their way to a good grade, and not have to follow through. In either case, I usually just pretend to be oblivious. When they say things like that classic, "I'll do anything," and I do mean anything to pass the class, I'll respond with something like, "Good, because it's going to take a lot of hours in the library to catch up with the reading," or, "Yes, you'll really have to write a stellar essay to make up for this." For most of them, they don't push beyond that. Every so often, though, there's a really aggressive one. When that's the case, I try to avoid ever being alone with them. I get my student assistants to interrupt us at regular intervals, etc., so they can't really work their way up to it. However, I had one so aggressive years ago that she wouldn't be put off by anything. If there was no desk between us, her hand would immediately be climbing up my thigh. If I put a desk between us, the moment I glanced away she'd be coming around at me. So, one day, I was literally climbing up my chair to get away from her, and I loudly protested, "I'm married." She retorted, "What's your wife got that I don't?" My reply, "A college education." I'm particularly proud of that comeback. 2 stories. My first job was trade school in Ecuador for high-risk high school students. The very first day of class a student did coke off the table in the middle of class. Over the course of the semester I learned he was on his best behavior that first day. He failed, as did most of his class. I gave them a retest, in my free time. I then gave them extra credit for something trivial. In the end, Cokehead was the only student who failed. I turned in grades and hit the bar to finalize a Galapagos trip. Departing the next day, guess who showed up? My Cokehead bought me a drink which I drank before I realized who it was from. He then came over to beg me to change his grade. Impossible at this point. He offered me drugs, kept buying me drinks, which I left undrunk. After a couple hours of this he left. I was so relieved. I was getting physically intimidated by him. He comes back with a hotel room key. Tells me to go across the street and fuck his girlfriend. She was sitting next to him and never had any reaction. He pulled her shirt down in the dingy bar. She still didn't respond, neither indicating she was willing or that she opposed. He then got some of the barflies to come over to up the offer. I was completely horrified, barely able to say a word. I don't really remember how I got out of there. Some local saw the situation and stepped in to walk me to a taxi home. To this day, whenever I go back to that town I'm worried I will run into him. Story 2. When I was 27 I was teaching a string of EFL jobs in another South American country. I had one class that was a 25-year-old girl who was a returning student who already had a degree and she had a lot of free time. I taught that class 4 hours a day 7 days a week. She was good student who started showing up early to chat with me. I refuse to speak L1 during class, before and after I prefer it. Then I started walking her home after class. I'm getting tired of typing, so I'll skip to the fun. One night I'm at her house and we end up going at it on the kitchen table at 5 a.m., complete with her moaning repeatedly, "You're my teacher, this isn't right." Her sister is also a student of mine, in another class. The sister walks in and catches us in the act. Me, being completely awkward in all situations, said the first thing that popped into my head. "You're getting home late, you have the final in 2 hours." Fun time was over and I ended up leaving the school over my embarrassment. Using my squeaky clean alt for this one. I teach math at a major US university and usually end up with at least one lower level class each year. Like most of the replies in this thread, I have students flirt, or make subtle comments fairly regularly, but one student really went above and beyond. She was doing poorly in my class with about a 65% average early in the semester, but she was coming into my office hours regularly for help. She was really trying, but was still struggling with the material. I really wanted her to do well, because it was clear that she was willing to put in the work, so I didn't mind the extra time. She was a very attractive young lady and always wore tight or revealing clothes to my office hours, but that was how she seemed to dress normally, so I didn't think anything of it. She didn't really flirt much, but there were the little hand/arm touches from time to time. I kept my office door open and was on a busy hallway, so I didn't really worry about it. Well, toward the end of the semester she shows up for office hours and asks if she can charge her phone. She didn't have a charger, she said, but she had a cable, and could she just plug her phone into my laptop? I didn't think anything of it and said sure. She got fairly flirty that session, and was starting to cross into inappropriate territory, but I played dumb and kept things focused. When we wrapped up, she unplugged her phone and said something like, "I think my phone copied some pictures to your computer. Tell me what you think." Oh boy, did her phone ever copy some pictures. There were literally hundreds of pictures of her which looked to be taken over the course of the semester, almost all of them nude. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a good long look at them that night before I deleted them. I'm only human that I had to report it to my department chair, but I told Ann that I'd like for us to assume it was an accident, but I wanted cover too. We had a meeting with her and she was embarrassed, but we stuck to the "it was probably an accident" line and left her most of her dignity. Surprisingly, she didn't drop. Instead, she apologized after the next class, very embarrassed, and promised it wouldn't happen again. I continued to let her come to office hours for help, but we sat in a common area instead of in my office. She ended up pulling a C-, which I bumped up to a C because of the extra work she put in. I would have done the same for any student even without the pictures, so I figured it was only fair. She made a mistake, as many college kids do, and I didn't think I needed to punish her anymore. I used to teach an astronomy class which required the students to once a week, weather permitting, go outside for 2 hours to the campus observatory and point out constellations and look through the telescope. One girl in my class was pretty clever overall. She didn't like working particularly hard, so she always sat with the nerdy awkward guys who easily did all the work. She was reasonably attractive and playfully flirted with them enough to get them to basically do all her work for her. Having been in their situation in college, I quickly recognized it as an instructor. One day she asks me if the observatory would be open, to which I responded, "I don't know," because it was the middle of the day. She then sighs and says, "Maybe we could meet up at my place tonight, get a movie, and determine my grade some other way." Well, me being the suave physics grad student that I am, just stared at her expressionless, turned, and quickly walked away to the other side of the room. As I was walking away, I start hearing the guys at the table jump in on this offer and start planning to bring food and movies, as they figured this was an open invitation to the table. I have no idea what happened.